Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to talk about Gary Gygax, and we're going to answer the question: why does Castles and Crusades and why does Legendary Journeys suck? Why do they suck? Right? It's a valid question, right? And the reason why is so let's get the facts straight, okay? So Gary Gygax. And if you think the facts are different, I invite you to correct me below, okay, in the comments, all right? Or with your own response video. All right, I get both. I also get people who, just take my content, play it, and talk over every sentence because that's what it takes for them to process it. So I get responses in lots of different ways. Feel free to respond the way that you're comfortable with. All right, so let's get the facts straight. So Gary Gygax, he brings Dungeons and Dragons in 1974 to the world. Drops it in place, okay? Then he has 12 years that I call his fire years, right? And he is on fire for Dungeons and Dragons. He is all over the commercial end and all over the creative end. He writes multiple books, and he also goes to Hollywood and establishes Dungeons and Dragons as a 1980s Saturday morning cartoon. That is not a small accomplishment. That is a huge accomplishment. And the older I get, the more I think you cannot sleep on how important it was that Dungeons and Dragons was a 1980s Saturday morning cartoon, because it's a success that is in many ways divorced from Dungeons and Dragons. There are a lot of people who are fans of Dungeons and Dragons who don't play Dungeons and Dragons, right? They're fans of the show, right? And they're fans of 1980 Saturday morning cartoon because it was phenomenal. It was this period where commercialism brought an incredible energy to children's television and brought, frankly, what is quite arguably the best children's television ever created, right? And so Gary, he was on fire between 1974 and 1986. Then 1986 happens, and he realizes, okay, I've been controlling the commercial end and the creative end, and I mismanaged it. My hubris was too much, and frankly, I almost put Dungeons and Dragons out of business, right? So he handpicks his successor, okay, Lorraine Williams, and he's like, I know you are going to make TSR the most progressive tabletop role-playing game company in the world, because no other tabletop role-playing game company in the world has a woman for a CEO. And I know that you're going to instill value and make Dungeons and Dragons bigger and better. And he was 100% right? He handed it over to Lorraine Williams, and she did. She built it to the point where it could be sold for $35 million to Peter Atkinson, who was chock full of cash from Wizards of the Coast's main success, which was Magic the Gathering. Okay, all right. So now you have another set of years. You have 1986 to 2008, right? So 86, 96, 2000, yeah. So 96, 2000. So for 22 more years, right? Gary Gygax is alive, and in this time, he writes Castles and Crusades. He works on Castles and Crusades and Legendary Journeys, right? So he brings these two games to the public, right? Now, these games suck, right? Now, Sky, you're saying these suck. Why do you say that? Well, they were completely outsold by Lorraine Williams' Dungeons and Dragons every single day of the week. They were completely outsold, outclassed, out-distributed, outwritten, out-arted, everything. They just suck compared to Lorraine Williams' Dungeons and Dragons, right? So why does Castles and Crusades, a game that Gary created with the Troll Lord guys, and Legendary Journeys, why do they just suck? And why did everybody do not want? If four grognards and a cat play Castles and Crusades to this day and have ever since, it's never had a large audience. And Legendary Journeys, every book. Oh, and you can go to every academic historical narrative, not academic historical record of Gary Gygax's and TSR's life, which there are now at least 4 of, right? Game Wizards, Empires of Imagination, of Dice and Men, Slaying the Dragon, all telling the story of how how Castles and Crusades and Legendary Journeys sold like junk, and nobody wanted it, and everybody's like, do not want. And Lorraine Williams rode circles around Gary, right? So why? Did Gary forget all his skills? No. I'm going to give you my humble opinion why. Here's my humble opinion on why Castles and Crusades and Legendary suck. They suck because Gary made them suck, all right? And here's why he did that. He realized he had his fire years. His work was done, right? He had created, in my humble opinion, he didn't create a game, he created a human improvement engine. He made sure that going forward, humanity would have what it needed for emotional and intellectual evolution to catapult forward, right? And he did that with Unbound Identity, creating a game that shattered the narrative model of every form of storytelling ever, and just created an absolutely new, fresh, innovative way to tell stories, and allowed every person in America with no money, right? Dungeons & Dragons can be played free. Go over and check it out on Sly Flourish. To explore gender questions, explore religious questions, explore political questions, explore gender, orientation, the physical realm the physical shape of your body. Every identity question could be explored with Dungeons & Dragons. He created this, right? And so he knew his work was done, right? And he also knew that his hubris was dangerous, right? And that if he remained with Dungeons, unlike Stephen Jobs, who, like, come on, what's Apple done since he died, right? He's like, I'm not going to stay here and let this flounder under my hubris. I want this to grow, so I'm picking the next guardian. And he did. He picked Lorraine Williams, and she did a tremendous job. She instilled and built everyday quality and value into Dungeons & Dragons. And you are benefiting from that right now. Spelljammer and Dragonlance both came out of Lorraine Williams' time on Dungeons & Dragons, right? So, like, you are literally reading and enjoying the products Lorraine Williams created today, right? Like, and so, like, this isn't like some abstract concept. Like, it's like it came out a month ago and people are enjoying it right now, right? So basically, you have the fallow years. You have from 1986 to 2008, right? And Gary knew he needed to not overturn the work he had already accomplished, right? He had created his life's work was done. All that was left was feeding himself, his wife, and his kids, right? And that's why he made these games, so that he could just remain in his fallow years, right? So that he'd have something to do, and he could plod through the next 22 years until when? What's he waiting for? Literally his death, right? So I think Gary Gygax, he was a contemporary of Isaac Asimov. Gary Gygax read science fiction, right? He was a huge fan of it. He actually lists Isaac Asimov's work in Appendix N material, right? And so he read Foundation. Harry Seldon knew that there would be these years, right? There would be his fire years when he did his actual real work, his fallow years when he waited to die because his work was finished, right? And just kind of putzed around until death took him, right? Harry Seldon, right? And then he would have his fallen years. And you know what happens in your fallen years? That's when your real work gets done. That's when your legacy carries everything forward, right? And what's Gary's legacy? It certainly is Castles and Crusade and Legendary Journey, games that are absolute trash, right? Because he made them trash, right? Because he didn't want anything to upturn the apple cart of the absolute hugely successful, famous legacy that he had already established with Dungeons & Dragons. His work was finished. This was him selling cabbages on the street, right? And it was like cabbage. It just sucked, right? And so if you ever wonder, hey, why was Dungeons & Dragons, like, why is it in the #1 streaming show today? Why is it name-checked on 100 different shows? Why is it being made a cohesive product with Magic the Gathering? Why does it have every sign of intellectual property success, but Castles and Crusades and Legendary Journeys suck on every single level, and absolutely no one is doing anything significant, and still 4 grognards and a cat are playing those games. Why? Because Gary made it that way on purpose, in my humble opinion. He understood the shape of his life, his fire years, his fallow years, single thing he said between 1986 and 2008, he could skip it, because none of it meant a thing. It was his fallow years. It was when the field is fallow and nothing grows, right? Like maybe some weeds poke up, and that's exactly what happened. Castles and Crusades and Legendary Journeys are weeds that poked up during the fallow years of Gary's life. And now he has in his fallen years, and his legacy is doing more to push Dungeons & Dragons forward, and Dungeons & Dragons is doing more to push his legacy forward than anything that ever happened in the fallow years, including Castles and Crusades and Legendary Journeys, which, trust and believe, go read them, they are utter trash, right? And all the books he wrote in that period don't matter either. They were all junk as well, right? And you could tell why, because he doesn't even talk about Dungeon Masters. He doesn't have anything to say about Dungeon Masters. Nothing, right? And because his work was finished, okay? So if you want to know about Gary Gygax, pay attention to 1974 to 1986. Give him sympathy for living through his fallow years, and pay very close attention to right now, the fallen years, when the legacy is growing. All that's my humble opinion. I'd love to hear yours. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.